Good morning and welcome back to Aliyah Yomi. Today we're going to be learning Kedoshim Shlishi, the third Aliyah in Parshas Kedoshim. The topic of our Aliyah is respect for life, and the Aliyah is 10 psukim long, running from Perek Yud Tes Pasuk Chav Gimel to Lamed Beis. Basic overview of Aliyah. A number of mitzvahs packed into our Aliyah. The first one is the mitzvah of what is called Orla. That is, when a person plants a fruit tree, they need to leave the fruit tree for 3 years before eating its fruit. The next mitzvah is Neta Ravai, which is when one takes the fruit of the 4th year, one needs to take that fruit and bring it to Yerushalayim to eat it. Kodesh Hilulim La Hashem. And in the 5th year, then you can eat the fruit there onwards, and Hashem will give us more fruit. That's the second mitzvah in our Aliyah. The third mitzvah is very complicated, very interesting mitzvah, which is V'lo sechlu al hadam. Do not eat on blood. You have to figure out what that means. And then another two mitzvahs, which are Lo sanachashu v'lo sa'onenu. These are about superstition. So these are the kind of things where, as the Gemara gives examples, a person's eating and the bread falls out of their mouth and they say it's a bad omen, or they say this time is propitious for X, Y, Z, whatever it is that they feel there's better times, there's better places, there's things they shouldn't do because of certain signs, that you're not allowed to do that as a Jew. And then the Torah gives us two separate mitzvahs of V'lo sakivu pas rashchem, V'lo sashches pas zekenecha. For men, that you're not allowed to cut. There's certain 5 areas on the head that are not allowed to be the hair may not be cut, and on the face there are 5 areas that the hair may not be cut. When it comes to the head, that's in general, that a person's not allowed a Jewish man is not allowed to shave their head. They're not allowed to have a fully shaved head. And that's even if they do it with a scissors, that's not allowed. When it comes to the zakan, the beard, there are certain areas which on the face which may not be cut, but that's with a razor, with a blade. But with a scissors or anything which has a scissor action, not a blade action, then one may cut those areas on the face. That's one of the differences between what's called pas harosh and pas zakan. The areas, the corners, literally, there's 5 areas on the head, 5 areas on the face, which may not be cut. Basic halachas, which most people are not very familiar with at all. The next mitzvah in the Aliyah is kasoes kaka, which is a tattoo or a mark made on the body. That's not allowed as well. The Torah then also says lo sachalel spitchol aznos. A person should not allow one's daughter to enter into promiscuity because it's going to lead to all kinds of immorality. And then the Aliyah concludes with a few other mitzvahs which are Moira Migdash, Migdashi Tira'u, fearing my Migdash, and then Al Tifnu El Ha'avois Val Yidonim, do not go after an Ov and Yidoni. These are 2 different kinds of people who bring back the dead, whether it be they use a bone that they put in their mouth that it speaks, or they put it under their arm, or using different parts of the body to call back voices from the netherworld. And that your new person needs to give respect to elders. Those are the mitzvahs that are in our Aliyah, a lot packed into these 10 short psukim. So a few basics that we're going to look at. Number one is, what is the reason for this mitzvah of Orla, that the first 3 years a person may not eat the fruit, the 4th year one needs to eat in Yerushalayim, much like Ma'aseh Sheni. So the Sefer HaChinuch explains that this is to awaken people to the gratitude that they ought to have for Hashem in their lives. So that's why that the best fruit starts coming in the year 4, and so for the first 3 years a person's not going to be eating from it, but when one's about to start really enjoying the fruit, the toil of their actions, at that point in time they channel it, they relate it to the Ribbon Shalom, to the Almighty, and they're able to bring Hashem into their lives and seeing Hashem in their lives. However, the Ramban takes it slightly differently, and he explains that this is not about seeing Hashem in our lives, but more it's an element of sacrifice. Much like we sacrifice the first of our efforts, there's an element of Pidyon Haben, the firstborn son. There's Bikurim, the first fruits, same word really. What is interesting over here is here you have the first 3 years of a fruit tree, we're dedicating it to Hashem. There's an element of sacrifice to minimize our control, minimize our view of being in charge of things. So Hashem says is that your first 3 years you're not really in charge. I'm going to make sure that you're not in charge, and even the 4th year I'm going to make sure that you can eat it, but it's dedicated. It's through the prism of Mikdash. It's through the prism of my connection. Rashi does point out that at the end of this, if you do this, Hashem says, I'm going to add to your produce, Ani Hashem, I am Hashem, I'll make sure to repay you back. I'll make sure that if you do this, you'll be blessed. There's an element where there's actually an unusual promise that the Torah makes as well. It's worthwhile noting that the Oznaim Torah does point out that when Adam HaRishon sinned in Gan Eden, all the way back at the beginning of time, what happened was that the curse that affected Adam personally was that you're going to have to, by the sweat of your brow, you'll eat bread, and it's going to take a lot of work to produce food. Or truth be told, that curse on the land was actually more relevant to grain, to things that need to be planted on a year-to-year basis. A tree certainly does require cultivation, certainly at the beginning, but after a while, it really is, yes, one does prune and one does need to make sure that there's no diseases, but generally speaking, a tree grows and continues producing. That means to say that a tree is less subject to the curse of Adam HaRishon, and specifically, therefore, at trees that we have the reminder of the Chet of Adam HaRishon, which is the idea of waiting. Don't just have because you want. Don't just have because it's available to you. That's what's reminded to us. So there's a sort of, we'll call it, microcosmic reminder of this Chet of Adam HaRishon in the area that the sin is not as explicit as well. Then we have the mitzvah of Lo Sochel al Adam, do not eat on blood. What does that mean exactly, not to eat on blood? So the Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Samar Gimel tells us a lot of options as to what that could actually mean. There's a number of different options. In fact, this is what's called a lav shebechlolos. This is a very general prohibition which has multiple applications. And this is a dispute in Halacha, the Rambam and the Ramban, whether one can get a punishment like a malchus, a lashes for a lav shebechlolos, and such a prohibition. But be it as may, what are included in this general prohibition? So Gemara enumerates a lot of things. Number one is eating an animal before it dies. So eating from an animal while the blood is still flowing in it. Another one is eating Kedoshim, it means holy meat, before Zrikas Hadam, before the blood is sprinkled on the Mizbeach. Again, Al Hadam, before the blood is sprinkled on the Mizbeach. Another is that there is no Ein Mavrin, there's no Seuda Savra, the first meal for those who die for a Haruge Beistin, for those who are killed by Beistin, those who are guilty of a crime that brings them to capital punishment. There is no Seuda Savra for them. There's Olei Sulachulu Al Adam there, the Dam meaning the person who is killed. The blood of the person being killed. Similarly, the Beis Din who puts a person to death cannot eat that day. It's a very serious issue. They're not allowed to eat the day that they put somebody to bed. Lo sochel al adam, do not eat on the blood of the person who's been executed. The most famous expression of this mitzvah is something which applies to us every single day, and that is Lo sochel al adam. Don't pray before you don't eat before you daven. There's a prohibition of eating before davening. One's allowed to drink water. One's even allowed to have a coffee or a tea. But having any food is not allowed before davening, and this is and the way the Gemara puts it in Brachos is don't eat before you've prayed for your blood, before you've prayed for your life and existence. Where Rav Kook understands that Gemara in his commentary is that in order to understand why it is that we exist, we need to focus on our spirituality first. We need to understand who we are before we start just putting our face into the trough like an animal. And then finally, the last prohibition which is included in this over here, the sixth idea is don't be a glutton. Don't be gluttonous. Lo sochel al adam. Don't eat in a way that makes you look like a glutton. And then, in fact, this is even used as the warning, the azhara for the ben sorer umoreh. How does the Torah warn us not to do such actions, to act like a glutton? Is from Lo sochel al adam over here as well. The Sefer Chinuch does point out that the general idea over here is that there's a certain amount of, we'll call it, bandwidth of interest and want in the world. Some of it's physical, some of it's spiritual in every single person. And if a person spends their entire life pursuing the physical, all these actions show a person who's not willing to wait, a person who's interested in their own physical well-being. There's not going to be much left for the spiritual bandwidth to be interested, because it's a much more subtle call. And if it's all one's will and ratzon is taken up by physical needs, there's not much left for the spiritual as well. Now, moving on, what's the mitzvah of onen and menachesh and the oven? You don't need to call up the dead, not omens, not signs. What's the Torah really telling us? So there are those like the Ramban who say that these are powers in the world that Hashem doesn't want to engage in. Hashem, there could be relevance to these ideas. One's not allowed to call up the dead. One's not supposed to, as Shaul HaMelech disobeyed this in Sefer Shmuel, and he calls up the dead. He calls back Shmuel HaNavi. You're not allowed to do that, but it works. It's something which is a possibility. There is such an energy, but Hashem doesn't want us to use that energy. The Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah famously says that the Isser over here, the prohibition, is just don't be stupid. These things don't work. The people who profess to do these things are quacks. None of them know what they're doing. They're speaking in a baritone in a dark room with shutters, and they're rattling beads. All that's nonsense. So the mitzvah is don't act like an idiot and don't listen to people who are going to pull the wool over your eyes. None of this is meaningful. None of this has any relevance. There's no energy. It's all games. And so therefore don't fall prey to games. Don't employ quacks. That's what the Torah is telling us over here as well. Now, what's the mitzvah of Pas Harosh and the tattoos? Why? What the cutting the hair on the head and the beard? And so the Sefer HaChinuch says, although this doesn't explain the entire thing, but there is an element over here which is don't be like the nations around you, because the nations around you, the Amorites, the Canaanite nations, would shave their heads in specific ways that were part of their pagan worship, and we're not allowed to do that. So obviously that is not something which is relevant today, but the mitzvah is still extant, but it does have certain relevance at that time as well. Rashi points out that it's also an element of mourning practices. There's an element of fatalistic mourning practices that people would have, and that's when tattoos are made, and even today in certain religions, that's the way it works. We're not involved in that as well. Finally, what is involved in honoring elders at the end of the Aliyah? So Rashi says that included in that is like not sitting in their spot, not contradicting them. And the reason why it says Ani Hashem, I am God at the end of the Aliyah, is to remind you that if you ignore them and you ignore this mitzvah, Hashem says, I know, I'm watching. I'll make sure that I'm going to make you aware of the fact that you omitted this. The Gemara in Kedoshim Daf Bay is actually records a debate as to whether this is referring to any old person or a person who is wise as well. So the one opinion is any old person. The other one is Zaken, refers to the acronym of Zesha Konachachma, a person who acquires wisdom. The halacha is we paskin that even a zaken ashmai, even a person who is an ashmai. What does that mean? Rashi says an ignorant person or a sinner. The Torah says not a sinner. We can't respect a sinner who's not an elderly person. It's referring to an ignorant person. Many people are old, but they haven't spent their life working on things. So they may have years, but they don't have wisdom. But we still nonetheless respect them as well. The Kotzker finally concludes and says that an elderly person is a person who may have lost their physical strength and abilities, but all their desires therefore turn from physical desires into egotistical desires, the need for kavod, the need for honor and recognition and relevance, which is why there's this mitzvah to honor them, because in a certain sense this is day machsarai. This is what a person really needs. This is what a person has lost, and it is a great chesed to return to them the needs that person has, which is in the currency of kavod, when a person is at this stage and age in the game. With this we conclude the third aliyah. In the meantime, have a wonderful and meaningful day.